watershed groups and organizations, and they had a terrifically important program to provide some funding, and we got some funding from them now too. And their support is certainly important, but it's very funding is very cyclical, and as foundation portfolios waned, so did our ability to attract their contributions, and so we've struggled as a lot of watershed groups have. And something that's always sort of made me frustrated from just a water evaluation standpoint is that water, we tend to water is free. We've got these giant Great Lakes, they're full of water. What's the big deal? And why people like the lake and they like water and the resources, they don't invest in it very much. They'll pay their water bill, they'll pay their sewer bill, but they don't really, have never been asked to pay for anything to support watershed stewardship, to preserve the long-term value of the water in the watershed. And that's been a weakness, not just here in our valley, but all the watershed groups around the country struggle with that. And I've given speeches, even at EPA in Washington, about models, smarter models for funding about that. So,
Jim, you've talked about what's going on here in the Cuyahoga River, but you just referred to other watershed districts. I don't know how many riversheds go into the Great Lakes, 18 or 20 or something like that. What are other watershed districts doing, and are we ahead of? We might have had further to come from behind, but up in Detroit, I think the Rouge River was horribly polluted. What are other watersheds doing, and where do we stand in the scale of things?
All right, good question. There are, I think well over 200 major rivers that flow into the Great Lakes. There's that amphibian again. About 33 of them in the United States were designated as what are called areas of concern. In other words, they were the most polluting, the most stressed, the most need of recovery in the Great Lakes. They're called areas of concern. And the plan for those was to have a remedial action plan to deal with it. And the federal model for that was interesting because it said, all right, locally driven, locally defined, let us know how you're doing. No money, no power, just have a plan and go do it. And so that was the RAP model, and it could persist to this day throughout the Great Lakes. When the President Bush in 2005 ordered the creation of a new federal plan to restore the Great Lakes, there was a lot of discussion about where are the RAPs and how are they doing and how well are they organized. And we took some time to actually study that quite a bit. And discovered that many of the RAP areas don't even have a local organization, there's no local sponsors, and so there's been very, very slow progress in making recovery at several of the RAP areas around the Great Lakes. And that there's no real consistent statistical model you can apply to that. I will say the Ohio model, where there was some real designated staff by the state of Ohio EPA, and the leadership that Ohio provided in forming locally sponsored non-governmental organizations like the Cuyahoga RAP in all 4 Ohio RAP areas yielded a much more organized effort at the local level. So I would say Ohio as a state is way ahead of the other Great Lakes states in terms of its organization for remedial action plans. And the effort at the local level is probably as far along as any. Now the Detroit River that you mentioned, which we share a Great Lake with, has been fairly successful, and it had a lot of industrial sponsorship in that area. The Stroh family, the Stroh Brewery, stepped up and put the coalesced partnerships with GM and Ford to say, look, if we're going to be here, if we're going to live here, if we're going to attract employees here, we need to have a higher quality watershed and a water body. And some of the example that they used was the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. That you want a livable community, you have to have a relationship of your employees to green space and livable communities. And so our model inadvertently helped lead some of the effort in the Detroit River. And they've got a very robust body of tributary groups and stewardship, as well as an international RAP relationship with Canada on refuge and stuff like that. And there's been steady, incremental process from a variety of sources that have been pretty effective. Lot to do, huge city, a lot of urban problems. It's just everything like Cleveland, only bigger because it's a bigger city. And so there's a long way to go. In terms of level of recovery, I think the Cuyahoga River has probably come farthest in the most ways of any of the big rivers in the areas of concern. A lot of the ALCs are toxic harbors and things like that, but Cleveland and the Cuyahoga River is really legendary now in the Great Lakes for the magnitude of recovery that we've endured or enjoyed. And the amount of recovery we still have to do is still out there, though it's still very daunting. And so our work's far from finished. But interesting question. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I'd like to make the observation that Cleveland's population is probably inversely correlated to the clean water in the Cuyahoga River. As the water was getting dirty in the early part of the 20th century, the population was growing, and then as the water has been getting cleaner in the past 40 years, the population has been declining, and it should be the other way around. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you see the future unfolding. We've got this powerful economic attraction here of clean water, but what are the mileposts that you see that Cleveland should watch for this connection between Cleveland's revival because of the clean water and the assets of the Great Lakes? What should we be seeing and trying to work for to make that happen?
Okay. One is that kind of a little clarification in terms of the population of the city versus the watershed. Over the last 40 years, the population of the Cuyahoga Valley watershed remained essentially unchanged, though it relocated. There was a big chunk of it that was in the city of Cleveland that relocated from out of the city to the more rural areas. But the population that drained into the Cuyahoga River really essentially unchanged, even though the center city got vastly underpopulated, which is an interesting problem because we ended up with the same number of people, but triple the imperviousness in terms of rooftops, driveways, new houses, shopping centers, those kinds of things. We tripled that for the same number of people. And so the issue of sprawl in our region is a marker going forward of how do we deal with upstream stewardship. We've been very effective in dealing with point discharge issues, industrial processes. Certainly the work that the SER district's invested in has had massive improvements on the day-to-day treatment technologies. And so now going forward, what we're seeing the need for is more and more upstream stewardship. So one of our models is to really grow stewardship at the tributary level. We've continued to encourage the formation of tributary-based watershed groups and the formation of tributary-based watershed management plans, and link those plans to land use and land use behaviors and the integration of green space and those kinds of things. So one of the things that we measure is actually our ability to incubate and grow new groups and develop new plans. 6, 7 years ago, there were 1 or 2 other trib groups, and now we have 9 that have been created, and 7 of those have plans, and 2 are underway, 2 more. And so we eventually will have the entire watershed under stewardship at the local level. And I think that'll be an important step forward as far as the long-term health of the watershed. Other things that we're going to be looking at are delisting, specific delisting actions that are going to continue to improve the river. Dams is one of our delisting goals, and removal of the Edison Dam, and while preserving water for the canal will be a major step forward because that'll allow free access into the national park for spawning fish population. The recovery of the river in the Monroe Falls and the Kent Dam area clearly tell us what can happen to the quality of aquatic species if we can get that dam out of the middle of the park. So that's a goal. Sediment removals in some areas are, we've got one area left in the old river channel, and we've got the city working very closely with us now to remove those sediments and also do some shoreside habitat restorations that will help really improve that final section of the river. And then some other habitat additions. We have a list of habitat areas that we've mapped in the tributaries and in the main stem. And we went through an interesting process where we evaluated them with some GIS technology and ground truthing for their importance, not just easy. A lot of funding goes to restoration of wetlands because somebody owns them and you can deal with it quickly.